And ultimately that meant that I have worked pretty much in almost every kind of OT that provides pediatric therapy. So I've worked within a school setting, I've worked within diagnostic clinics, I've worked in the public health system, in hospitals, I've also worked in private, and now currently a director of my own practice, which interestingly wasn't ever my big dream or goal. I definitely thought that I had the most success working for somebody else because being autistic and ADHD, I thought that my skills were better in OT directly.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Healthy Business Lab podcast, where we interview amazing allied health business owners to share their insights, learnings and experiences. And today I'm super excited to have Claire Britton from Neuroinclusion on the call with us today. Claire, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Craig. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we had a chat a couple of weeks ago before this call and super excited for you to share a bit of your background. We like to talk about sharing what our expertise in. So I'd love to get a bit of the background of your expertise and also in the way of some ideas that people can implement from that expertise that might actually help them in their businesses as well. So the floor is yours to run through a bit of that, and this conversation will just flow from there.
Amazing. So I'm an occupational therapist of 10 years. I'm originally from Melbourne and escaped COVID, thankfully, and now live in Perth, where it's much sunnier and much slower. And since moving to Perth, I have worked for a number of companies and had 2 babies and got married, and that naturally changes what we look for in work. And that for me also led to being diagnosed with ADHD and autism, and suddenly realizing that the kinds of clients that I was working with so well and so naturally was because I was of the same neurotype, which is the more that I share and talk about it, the more common it actually is for allied health professionals. So that's quite cool. And then I noticed that a lot of the practices were offering quite a lot of different things, and it was quite competitive, especially post-COVID and in Perth, because our borders were closed, and so the supply was quite short, but demand was really high. And that naturally changed the landscape of hiring and where people were looking for work. And suddenly we had a lot more flexibility. And ultimately that meant that I have worked pretty much in almost every kind of OT that provides pediatric therapy. So I've worked within a school setting, I've worked within diagnostic clinics, I've worked in the public health system, in hospitals, I've also worked in private, and now currently a director of my own practice, which interestingly wasn't ever my big dream or goal. I definitely thought that I had the most success working for somebody else because being autistic and ADHD, I thought that my skills were better in OT directly rather than marketing and rather than all the finance stuff. And growing up, my mum is tax accountant. So while she has provided a lot of exposure to a lot of the jargon and the language, I also learnt very early on that was her forte. So anytime that there was any kind of maths or that sort of thing, she would be able to jump in and support me with that without me even questioning why. So unfortunately for me, that meant I just never really built the skills or the confidence or even the curiosity to learn. And it wasn't until I moved to Perth and, she's in Melbourne that I realized I have to learn this. This is actually foundational.
I love that you're such a brilliant share of the vastness of experience with where you've been and what you've done and the wider experience. Definitely we will be delving into that business story in a little bit in a moment, but I just want to circle back to, again, that idea of, I think a lot of people in the allied health space, the neurodivergence that you've mentioned from your own diagnosis and realizations and the like, and that you mentioned Neurotribe idea. It's a book. It's one of the first books that I had in the space. I had my own self-realization of being autistic and the like. I'd love for you just to delve into that, just a little bit more of that, your own awareness of then being able to help guide the career or the thinking behind some of those decisions that you took moving from being an employee then into starting your own business. Just to unpack that and how you sort of use that self-awareness in that process of working out what you're going to do next.
Absolutely. I think I'm different in the sense that I would say I've had almost no self-awareness at the start. And what it was for me was my boss at the time sitting me down and saying, you are beyond any opportunities that we can offer you. You are an asset to a company, but we just don't have the structuring and the support that we think that you would need to flourish. And at the time I was really insulted and was like, what do you mean? I feel like I'm doing a great job. And I took that the wrong way and took that really personally and thought that was their way of nicely, gently telling me to move on. But actually that was a blessing in disguise, because from that position, I then stepped up into a national leadership role with a national company, and that really into leadership and clinical mentoring from a national standpoint, and learning about the industry beyond just your own little company or your own little workplace, being able to see the trends and notice the needs from a larger scale, which my brain had the opportunity to do that before. And it also meant that because I was doing a lot of coaching and a lot of supporting other OTs and therapists, I felt like I could identify a lot of trends that they were experiencing and shortfalls of different workplaces and opportunities that I felt like were quite easy to fix. But no one was listening around how we can fix this, how we can better support neurodivergent staff, and even just newer grads that are just finding their feet. It is a huge transition to go from university full-time to work full-time. And whilst we like to think we're providing the right supports, no one was really sitting with them and hearing what works for them, because a lot of these new grad programs are fantastic, but they're kind of a one-size-fits-all, and they don't really allow for the nuance of where people are in their life. And one person might find weekly supervision is really empowering and helpful and a safety net. The next person might feel that that's really overbearing and overwhelming and would rather have a touch point email. But no one was engaging in those conversations. So from that point, I also, back in COVID, I was working in PBS because I thought that I could change the PBS world and be more neuroaffirming, which is basically what I've always been and how I've always practiced, regardless of the things and the repercussions that I've unfortunately had, like professionally. As I was in my final year placement, I did not realize at the time, but the practice was an ABA practice. And I actually failed my halfway placement because I hugged an 8-year-old boy who was very dysregulated. And I feel like we had worked quite a lot to get him to request for like hugs, because we had explored his proprioceptive input. And at the time, there was no other resources. We were on the side of the road, so we couldn't really provide anything else. And he was begging me for a hug. And basically my supervisor said, like, you cannot hug him. We're ignoring this behavior. And I did. I hugged him. And at the time I felt a lot of guilt for that because I prioritized the 8-year-old over my own career. But now that's exactly what I'm all about. That's so cool. Like, I own
So
that.
spot on is like when you've had the time to reflect on a number of things that you've sort of talked about there. It's the doing and then reflecting sort of process, and then going, oh, how does that then guide for future actions? And I'm doing that. I like thinking patterns, and it's like just seeing a nice little looping motion that is, hey, I'm getting basically feedback loops at everything that we're doing. Is that a fair comment with how you work and processing?
Absolutely, yeah, 1,000%. So because of COVID, I think everyone had to jump online, and working in the PBS space meant that I was doing a lot of parent coaching and parent training. And the way that my brain works is very visual. So I love pastel rainbow. And the second that I see something pastel rainbow, my brain absorbs the information. So I found that a lot of the textbooks and the resources had a lot of bright red, a lot of bright blue, and my brain just really wasn't grasping it. And so I would create slides. At the time, it was PowerPoint because we didn't have Canva. We didn't have these beautiful programs that we have now. I would create PowerPoints that were pastel rainbow. And then with Instagram, I would start to sharing some of that so that my clients could access this information in more of a affirming way, because I found that when I was doing the parent coaching sessions directly with parents, it was quite intense. Whereas when they were absorbing the information on social media, they were normally more regulated. There was less of a need to reply or a need for action right then and there. So that's how it started. And unfortunately, but that was end of 2020. And now it's like over 40,000 followers, and it has kind of become this whole thing, which is so wild to think about. I'm so fortunate. And when I had my second baby, I I noticed that I had quite a lot of clients that were reaching out to me, or potential clients reaching out to me through the Instagram saying, we want you to be our OT. And at the time I was still at that national practice, and I had to say, like, I'm on mat leave. This is my employer. They're happy to hold your spot. And very quickly I had too long of a wait list for it to be even servicing myself. So I decided that, okay, obviously there's demand. I think worst case scenario, I'm a sole trader. I can always just fold. I feel like being neurodivergent, we often err on the side of things are going to go bad. So we need to make sure that we have a foolproof backup plan more than a contingency plan for success. We just need all of the backup plan stuff in action. And this was only in June 2024. So now being August 2025, we now have a team of 18. We have 2 clinics in Perth. We're based at Osborne Park and now in Coburn. We service about 100 different people all across Australia. We do quite a lot of corporate trainings and workplace and government organisations around what neurodiversity affirming is, because we have kind of created that environment ourselves.
What I think is brilliant about that is, again, seeing the evolution and your learnings across such the variety of areas within the industry. Some people could see 12 months to go, whoa, 18 people, 100 clientele. That's amazing. Leading up to that, none of that would have happened if it wasn't for that 10 years that you were talking about before of
absolutely
the learnings and picking up all those things. It's kind of like the overnight success that takes 10 years at the end of the day. But I guess what I'd love to dig into here is as well, it's that it is quite big growth from a business perspective in such a short space of time. I know that you would have loads. We could probably fill about 4 different podcasts around this. Some of the experiments that you've done in growing the team and the market. You touched on the marketing there. Again, wasn't maybe an intentional thing to begin with, but it's like an interesting experiment and no doubt that you've played with and evolved with as this has now grown. I'd love to hear a couple of learnings and experiments that you've tried in the business that you've learned from, that I'm sure there's plenty of other business owners out there going, oh, I'd love to pick a few of the gold nuggets out of that.
Yeah, sure. So I think my first big experiment was biting the bullet and presenting at a conference. That to me just seemed like something academics did. And again, that imposter syndrome, but actually realizing that imposter syndrome is actually true because I'd never done it before. And that's okay. Like, you're allowed to feel overwhelmed by something new. It's not an imposter syndrome per se. It's actually just the newness of an opportunity. And being neurodivergent and being very perfectionistic, I don't like doing things unless I know I'm going to be 100% successful. So putting yourself out there is really hard. And I feel like OTs especially, we don't do this well. We are kind of the allied health underdogs, I would say. We're quite newer onto the scene. We're quite happy to sit back while the psychs champion a lot and the speeches do an amazing job and the physios. OT seems to be the one that a lot of people don't know about. They don't really understand what we do. And so, yeah, that was the first big biting the bullet, because at the time I was sole trader. I think I was only like 3 weeks in. So it was very early. And again, I have that brain mentality that this is going to fail. So anything that happens positively is a massive win in my books. And I loved it. I really enjoyed being involved in the National OT Conference. It was the exchange one at the time, based here in Perth. And from that, all of a sudden, I had 4 staff. At the time, they weren't my staff, obviously, but they came up to me and were like, we love your values. We love what you're talking about. That's how we want to practice. Noticing that our employer isn't practicing like that. They aren't established in this niche. They're too broad. They're getting clients that don't align with what I want to be doing. Would you be interested in having staff? And at the time I was like, absolutely not. This is not what this is about.
I didn't come here for this. I just want to share some information.
Yeah, I thought this was just my career development of exploring presenting and facilitating trainings, not let's recruit. It was, I'm a sole trader. Like, I have to do a year of sole trading before I can take the leap. And I think at that point, that's when I said, I need to get a business coach. I need someone who's been there, done that, who knows the lay of the land, especially from the OT standpoint. And I was really fortunate to have Elise Svensk, and she really helped me from the start, being able to identify that, again, the demand was so high, but the supply was so low. So the fact that I had 4 OTs come straight to me saying, we want to work for you, that's unheard of. Hopefully it's slowly getting better, but it's pretty unheard of in the industry at this point in time. So I thought, okay, well, time is of the essence. Let's take on an OTA. Rather than a fully fledged OT, maybe I can work on that more staggered. And so I hired a fourth year OT student. And again, she was so empowered, so can do. There was nothing that was too hard. And at the time I was building a caseload and I loved my clients. I didn't want to hand them over and trying to find like another therapist that aligned with my practice and someone that I knew had the same values and the same standards of care, slowly getting harder and harder. All of the great OTs in Perth often are fully booked. Trying to find someone was really tricky. And that ultimately led to, okay, I need a team. I need to start hiring those OTs that were interested. Let's do some job trials. If I don't do job interviews, I don't think that they're affirming, and I don't think that is a true test to someone's success and to how great someone can be as a therapist. So we did some job trials and ultimately hired them, and they're still with me to this day. And even that OTA is now a new grad OT this year, and she is absolutely incredible. She's so proudly neurodivergent. Nicola is her name. She's just phenomenal, and she hit the ground running, working full-time, has never worked full-time before in her life, and absolutely just smashing goals. So it's been really cool to see those little trial and errors and seeing how that evolves. Another one that we've done.
Can I just jump in? Because they just flowed so seamlessly, I just want to highlight what you've sort of stepped through as far as even experiments, which again, it goes to show just stepping through the process and having what feels like just such a natural flow around it. Hey, there was the experiment of presenting at a conference for self-development, but for teaching and education, and see what happens. And then you kind of say experimented by, hey, I need some help with this. Got a coach on board. Okay, cool. And then no doubt with that, again, we've only touched on a few other things here, but that brought about feedback loops, testing, measuring, I like to call that experimenting and the like, and then onto the job trials, the recruitment. Again, doing that in a way, I'd love for you just to go into that a little bit deeper, because I know that was from one of our first chats. It's something that I love the idea of. So I'd love for you just to go into how that evolved and where it sort of came from a little bit, to just fill that out for people as to how that could look, or how it looks for yourself as it currently stands, and what it was like initially versus what it probably is now.
Yeah, definitely. So initially it was trying to not do job interview. I knew I didn't want that, because having jumped from job to job to job to job, I had done a lot of job interviews and I had noticed the same structure, similar questions. We now live in a society where ChatGPT and AI and TikTok are around, and you can just ask what's the correct answer to these questions. So it suddenly, it just changed the landscape, and it meant that people were too focused on how to accurately or correctly answer rather than answer genuinely. And that wasn't what I was about. I wasn't trying to catch out therapists and identify flaws or identify like challenges like I felt like a lot of job interviews do. They're trying to find, is this person insightful with what they're having difficulties with? And it does kind of, as a neurodivergent person, we pick up on those trends like you were saying, but also we know when we're being set up. And if we're feeling like the interview process is actually an interrogation, like you're going to meet the masked version. And in the therapy space, especially in our therapy space, it's a lot of unmasking, which is very different and very confrontational because of how society is and how we work. So being able to do a job trial in more of an authentic way sets the scene from day dot. We do not follow the rules. We meet every legal requirement. We do everything as per their work. We make sure everything is above board, but anything that can be adjusted to better suit our neurotype and isn't just for our autistic potential employees or, any sort of diagnosis. It's inclusive for everyone, regardless. So we don't have any issues with things like disclosure or anything like that, because we kind of all share openly and own it. And
I love that so much. And again, quote that is going to stick with me. I've got a few little goosebumps here. It was basically, hey, under the old way, it sort of felt like you're going to meet the masked version. So that whole idea of just being, especially in the neurodivergent space, of being able to see behind the mask, and people feel safe and comfortable and secure to be able to feel as though they can share that, which like you say, in a 1 or 2 short interviews, how much are we really going to do that? Again, it's selecting which parts do I show or shouldn't show, and it is coming back to what's right or wrong versus me just being me. So I love that you've set up a process for that, and yeah, it's just so good.
Yeah, and it means that from a time standpoint as well, like I don't have to then allocate time for job interviews. And then if the job interview isn't successful, that was a waste of time or that wasn't the best use of my time. Yep. Plus my clients love it. They get a 2 for 1 deal.
Yeah, that's when you've mentioned that previously on our previous call, you're just like, yeah, that just makes so much sense that it's like, actually, it can be such a good selling point as well. And it's such a lovely transition for somebody. And you touched upon it there that people, I'm guessing, they just feel so welcome as far as that process to go, hey, come on, do a trial, get to meet the team, work with people collaboratively, be able to share experience. And then I would guess that just flows on to such a nice sort of onboarding experience, integration timeline for the practice, which I guess leads to that question of then, given the fact that you've grown 18 staff already, no doubt it just feels like a cycle that you've now got probably pretty down pat into how you roll that out, which very much ties into the wider picture of business of how many people we can support, what's the cycle that we can, and what are the triggers for when is it right and sustainable to bring a new team member on, and getting that balance between client loads and what we're trying to achieve in the practice. Is that a fair comment as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I think as well, the industry is slowly changing where we used to not be able to bring clients with us and we changed jobs. And most great practices or most client-led practices that truly value the clients don't work like that anymore because the demand is so high for our services. We would rather the quality of the care and the maintenance of the relationship between the therapist and the client. So we're comfortable with that, even though I think it's in WA, we're slowly actually phasing that out. So you can't actually say you can't take your clients with you anymore. But because of that as well, it's changing the nature of hiring and taking on new staff because you don't necessarily have to fill a caseload from zero either. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's often evolving for sure.
So good. I feel as though there needs to be another podcast for more experiments, but I do want to get to some of the transformations that you've seen with that approach of what you've done. And I'm actually thinking of the transformations of the team as well as the clientele that you've actually got there. I'd love to hear 1 or 2 examples of, in the 12 months that you've been in business, what you've already managed to achieve.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones has been structure. Because when you work for yourself, obviously the structure is just you. And suddenly I feel like a lot of business owners or people that want to explore their own practice, they feel the need to know everything. And then I know I spent probably a good 2 weeks listening to every podcast, reading every book, thinking that, and I still very much have this premise of I'm learning, I don't know anything. And that has been very humbling and also has supported me because I'm constantly engaging in the space and constantly open to feedback. And that is like a precursor for co-design, which is a big part of being neurodiversity-affirming. And so sitting down with my team leaders, and we currently have 5 team leaders, and we have those monthly meetings where we sit down and go, okay, what lights your fire? What particular areas of practice are you really great at or most passionate at? And so for some of my OTs, that might be they're really passionate about mentoring external OTs. They might be doing incursions at schools to teach the school staff about neurodiversity. They might be more creating resources or group programs. So they each kind of have like their niche. And the idea is that they chose themselves. They all got to choose. And so therefore, I'm constantly telling them, if you guys are doing work that lights your fire, that feels meaningful and valuable, that then flows onto the rest of the team. So if at any point that project, you lose momentum, you're not too interested, that's okay because these things happen. But there's always more projects. There's always more ideas, especially the nature of being an ADHD business owner.
Always so many ideas. As you were talking, like, that's an endless supply, that is.
Yes, exactly. So creating that structure really helped because all of a sudden my junior staff and my new grads could see progression. And we know that through a lot of the research that a lot of people are moving jobs because they don't know what career progression looks like. And that can be really complicated, especially when you're in those early days of starting a practice, starting a business, because it might just be you and 2 other people or 1 other person. So trying to be able to create a clear structure of career progression. What does that look like? What's involved? What's the hierarchy? Because people want to feel successful and people want to feel like they're progressing. And that's really hard to do as a sole trader. And that's really hard to do in a smaller team, which is often why some new grads often go to those bigger national companies, because they feel that support in terms of being able to climb the ranks.
They can see just because of the size that there must be some opportunity there somewhere. So again, being able to provide that in the small business setting is brilliant. I can see why, again, that's transformational for the team members to be able to go, oh, you walk into one of these organisations where, hey, you can still see the pathways, but I don't have to get lost in this myriad of the large organisations. Having worked in public health as well, you touched upon that right at the start of the call as well. You can say, yeah, there's a lot of pathways, but it's also easy to get lost in those pathways in some ways, unless you get a really good team leader or a mentor or something like that. So, yeah, it's great. And what about from the client side of things? Is there one or two people that just sort of stick out of your mind as the transformations that you've been able to achieve? Again, we don't need to share personal details and the like, but just something that sort of in the first year that you've done that's just gone, this is why I'm doing this. I'd love to hear an example of that.
Absolutely. So I think one of the biggest ones for me, I'm really fortunate I keep an OT caseload. I feel like that's paramount. I know a lot of business owners do and some don't, and it's a personal choice. I only have 3, so I'm very selective, and these 3 are honestly incredible, and I'll probably see them to the day I die if they'll have me. Bless them. One of them did say to me, when will you not be my OT anymore? Is it because I'm doing too well? Will you stop being my OT? And I was like, that is actually the best question you could ever ask. That is monumental and such a cool sign that you're doing so well. And I was like, but no, if we become friends, I can't be your OT. Like, there's professional guidelines around that. And that was really cool. But I have an amazing 14-year-old who is twice exceptional. So has giftedness and has autism and ADHD and quite a lot of complex trauma around school. And I've been working with her around what school looks like for her, what's meaningful education. She was on a full scholarship for academics at her school, which put a bit of demand on her, I guess, because that was a maintenance thing. But she hardly went and hardly engaged at school. But then she'd do a test and she would get top mark. So she didn't really see the point. Like, what is the point of school?
What do I need to turn up for this? Yeah, I do what I need to do, and I don't have to deal with that over there. I just can do that. Let me do my own stuff.
Get the best score, get a certificate, be celebrated, and then go like that. And it was really interesting to hear that experience, because it was quite different to my own personal experience. I definitely am not academic by any stretch. Seeing for her that she was just so academic, but also not studying and just being able to turn up and having these conversations at 14 of why do I bother going to school? What is school meaningful for me? And for another term, she stayed purely for what we were learning around soft skills, around personal growth. And we talked a lot about resilience and the fact that going to school when you're not really learning anything is actually a really hard thing to do. And so doing the hard thing is actually building your skills to be able to do more hard things. And whilst the academic stuff wasn't hard for her, the going and listening to stuff she kind of already knew or could understand quite quickly. And so she continued to go to school and has actually since changed schools and now going to Lynn Beasley Academy, which is an alternative school, and is absolutely flourishing, doing more project-based work. She's got a project to set up the school library, and she is absolutely incredible and doing so much better in terms of her overall health, her overall happiness, and her sense of self is just like second to none. I can only want that for all neurodivergent people. It's so cool.
Such a great way to round out the conversation with what I just wrote down there, that sense of self. That wraps a lot of what you've set up across the conversation today, and wishing that upon anybody we work with, especially the neurodivergent community as well. That's been brilliant. There's been so many takeaways that I've got. I've got a couple of pages of notes here just myself, and I'm sure everybody listening is going to be doing the same. And I would love for people to be able to, obviously we'll add all your details in the show notes, but I'd love for you to share as well. Where's the best place for people to follow your content? You touched on Instagram earlier there as well, but what are the best places for people to connect?
Yeah, definitely. So LinkedIn, Claire Britton is probably the easiest for me personally. We also have Neuroinclusion on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook. We also have a website, www.neuroinclusion.com.au. We're always willing to have chats and work with what your goals are, whether you're OT, whether it's professional and corporate, because we really do want to see that neurodiversity acceptance spread as far as possible.
I love that share. I love the message. And I have a feeling we're going to have more chats off the back of this awesome podcast today. So once again, Claire, thank you so much for your time and for sharing all that valuable information. As always, at the Healthy Business Lab, we'd love for you to like, subscribe so you can hear more amazing chats just like I've had with Claire today. So Claire, once again, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Healthy Business Lab podcast. Make sure you subscribe to keep up to date with all the latest episodes.